The Cartoonerific podcast is sponsored by the Wonderful World of Animation Gallery, home of rare and wonderful fine animation art. Visit their website at wwagallery.com. And for our Cartoonerific listeners, you will receive a special 10% discount off any purchase if you purchase by March 25th, 2024. Just go to wwagallery.com and enter code CARTOON10 for your 10% discount. Once again, this discount is only valid until midnight, March 25th, 2024. Once again, visit wwagallery.com.
The following is a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
Welcome to Cartoon Fun. It's Cartoonerific. Yeah! It's Cartoonerific. Cartoonerific. It's Cartoonerific. With your host, Brian Mitchell.
Well, welcome to the Cartoonerific podcast, Classic Animated Cartoons. My name's Brian Mitchell, and I am your host. You know, normally when we do these podcasts, I'm talking about classic animated cartoons, and something I should be focusing on more is independent animation, meaning an individual or a group of individuals that do a film and they make it personal and they put it out there into festivals and stuff like that. And the focus hasn't really been on that. And I apologize for that. But we should be doing more of that because that's where some original ideas really come from. Not to say that original ideas don't come out of the studio process, but the studio feature films are normally produced anywhere from $50 to $100 to $200 million. And so, you know, they're taking a big risk with that money, putting it out there, because there's no guarantee that a studio is going to make the money back. But so they're not willing to take the risks, like maybe who's making a small film who can afford to take the risks, even though they're not backed by a major studio, but they're taking the risk because they want to make the film. They want to make the film, and regardless of whether it makes money or not, it's a big difference. And so you get a lot of creative things that come out of that, out of individuals that just want to make a film. And they want to make it their own way. And they don't want to be influenced by things that have been done before. They want to kind of go down their own route. And I know it's inevitable. You're always going to be influenced by somebody. But at least you're doing something with your vision. It's one voice, making a decision and producing the film, putting it out there. And there are many independent filmmakers out there. There's Patrick Smith, and you have Bill Plimpton, and the Hubleys, John Hubley, who used to work at UPA, and they were doing some very, very different types of animation at UPA studios in the 50s. But even then, they had to have a character that would kind of sustain the studio, and that was Mr. Magoo and Gerald McBoing Boing. So they would do that stuff, and then they would try to do some individual things on the side, some experimental things. And so, very important studio. But even at Disney, they used to experiment, and Ward Kimball was the experimenter, and he did a lot of weird and wonderful films over there. But they still had to kind of fit into the Disney mold. So that's what I'm saying. With independent film, somebody who's producing film totally free of the studio system, they can do whatever they want. And whether the idea is good or it's okay or it's great, basically there's no influence from anybody. They are making the film. They are making the decisions on how it's going to look and what the narrative is going to be and the music and all that other stuff. And they're doing it because they want to do it. Like I said, we should be focusing more on that. And I will be bring people on, independent filmmakers, to talk about certain things from time to time. today we have an independent filmmaker. He's done a wonderful film. He's worked in the studio system. He's worked for MTV. He's worked for Disney. He's worked for Cartoon Network. He's done a lot of different things. And his style is very personal, as evidenced by his film, his award-winning film that he did a few years back called New York City Sketchbook. He's a wonderful talent, and he's going to be on in a few minutes. His name is Willy Hartland, and we'll be talking with him right after this.
You're listening to the Cartoonerific Podcast, classic animated cartoons with your host animator, Brian Mitchell. And now it's time for our special Cartoonerific guest.
Well, the person that we have on today, I worked with him at a studio, believe it or not, in Newark, New Jersey. We're working on a feature film called Everyone's Hero. And originally it was called Yankee Irving when we were working on it. And Christopher Reeve was the director of it. And it was a interesting experience for us. But anyway, I was introduced to Willy, who had a very unique drawing style. And he's done some really interesting films over the years on his own while working in and out of the studio system, because you have to make some money somewhere. And so he worked on a number of things, Beavis and Butthead and Doug, working within that studio environment. And then in between, he would work on all these different things. And I really love some of the stuff. He's very experimental in not just in 2D, but he would work in clay animation and cutouts and then using computer technology to kind of bring this all stuff together and make some wild and wonderful stuff. Please welcome the wonderful, totally creative Mr. Willy Hartland. Hi, Willy. How are you doing today?
Hi, Brian. I'm doing very well. It's a real honor to be on your podcast, Cartoonerific. And by the way,
yes,
I love those women who sing at the beginning of your show. It must be expensive to have them come in every time and sing, or do you is that pre-recorded? I want to know.
No, they come in every single time, and they sing it, and it sounds exactly the same every single time. No, it's of course it's pre-recorded. Yeah.
Okay, but there are. Where did you get them? Because they're very gifted.
It's actually a guy. It's one guy, and he did all the parts.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, very talented. He did the whole thing. So yeah, a barbershop quartet type opening.
I had a podcast for about a year. It was called The Dope Sheet, and I didn't have the budget for that, so
yeah, we had a little bit of a budget, and it kind of blew it because there's a lot of stuff that I've done, including mailbag and stuff like that, and so that was all kind of done, and it's just sitting in a file folder, just waiting to be used. So that's where that is. Let's find out. Where'd you grow up? Let's start there.
I'm in Washington, D.C. I was born and raised in the nation's capital.
Okay.
And then I moved to New York City in 1984 after I graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design, also known as RISD.
Okay. And
yeah.
So when did you decide that you wanted to do, was there a decision made at a young age that you wanted to go into animation, or was this
Yeah, there was a few things that happened. One was, I think you'll find this very interesting. Well, there were a couple of things that happened. One is I had an art teacher in high school who said, "Is there anything you want to learn about?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to learn about animation." She said, "Well, I don't know anything about animation, but if you want to buy some books, and I can sort of supervise you, and you can." And she said, "You have next semester you can make a project class, and you can do anything, work in any medium you want. And I said, well, I want to make an animated little short film. And so she made me realize that this was something I could do, and all I needed to do was get a book and start teaching myself how to do it. So that was one thing. And then the other was, I used to watch, like you did, we're the same generation. I used to watch, The Wonderful World of Disney, and I remember watching. There were sometimes they'd show a documentary on how the cartoons were made,
right?
And just found that so interesting. Was the cameraman at the animation stand putting the cell underneath the platen, and then they'd sort of cut or dissolve to Donald Duck, walking, and then they'd freeze a frame. The background would move a fraction of an inch, and they put the next cell down. And I thought, oh my God, that just blew my mind. I said, I want to know how to do that. There was also, this is very interesting too. There was and this was all in the late 70s. There was an exhibit that Ward Kimball curated at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. called Building a Mouse Hill at the Library of Congress. It was it was a gallery show that Ward Kimball curated. You can Google this, and you can see pictures of him at the opening, at the black tie reception.
Wow.
And I saw this exhibit, and they had original artwork of. It was the first time I'd seen original Disney art. And I remember this is before the internet, so it was hard to, information about animation was hard to come by. There were not a lot of books. There was not. So in this exhibit, they had the original artwork. A lot of it was from like the Silly Symphonies. I remember seeing Music Land, and I remember they had the artwork in these little galleries, and then they had the monitor, a video monitor on a loop, playing the Silly Symphony cartoons. So you could, to your left, you could see the original paintings, and then you could see there's cartoon. There's the painting that was used in the cartoon, and it just blew my mind. And that really, I think after I saw that, I became really interested in animation. That might have led to me talking to my art teacher in high school and saying, I want to learn about animation, because that exhibit was over the top and incredible. And Ward Kimball curated it.
Yeah.
I think there was that guy who, from Disney Archives, I was talking to John Canemaker about this.
Okay.
He told me, I think he mentioned Michael Berry, but I could be mistaken. But I know it was Ward Kimball.
Right.
Was the main person. That was very, very big. And
Michael Barrier did live in Washington, D.C., so he may have had a hand in it. So
yeah, he probably did. I think that's what I remember Canemaker saying. I could be wrong. That was a big deal. That was pivotal. And then the other thing, my father had read something about there were these two guys who were doing a book tour, and they were coming to Washington, and they were going to talk about their book and show some clips from Disney feature films that they animated. And these two guys were Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson.
Right.
And my father took me to the Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And nobody knew who these guys were, because the book hadn't come out, and there wasn't really a lot of information if you didn't live, if you were not in the business and you lived, in Washington, D.C. or somewhere. It was hard to come by information. So they did a talk, and I went to this talk, and I was amazed, and then they said, okay, here's a clip from the Jungle Book. And I remember specifically the Jungle Book was something they referred to a lot. That was also just blew my mind. It made a huge impression on me.
Sure. Yeah, I think the Jungle Book was an early impression on me. And that came out in '67. That one, I was 5. Yeah,
you were around that age, and that for many baby boomers on the cusp like we are, that was a film many of us cite as our first Disney film that we saw or remember seeing.
Or an heavy inspiration. Yeah. Were you into art before this? Were you
I was always a class artist, growing all the way back to like first grade, and I grew up Washington D.C., my parent, we had the Smithsonian. We have all these incredible museums,
Right.
for free to the, they're paid. The Smithsonian is owned by the federal government, so our tax dollars pay for these museums, so they're free,
Right.
and you can go if you want. So I used to go to the National Gallery of Art, and I'd go to I go to the Hirshhorn, I go to all these museums, and I loved looking at art ever since I was a little kid. And so it was clear early on in my life that I would eventually become an artist.
Right.
Yeah, and also I was very interested in magic. This is something I think we may have talked about, are these sort of precursors to animation. If you talk to animators, they'll often mention ventriloquism, magic, and sometimes model railroading, model trains.
Right.
And these are the things that move, and building these little worlds, and giving ventriloquism, breathing life into a little puppet, making it talk, throwing your voice. Magic. Animation is magic. Magic, illusion, all those things. I was very interested in as a little kid, and my father worked for the federal government. I used to go down and have lunch with him. He worked about a block from the White House, and we would go. He'd take me out for lunch, and then we would walk a few blocks to this kind of shady part of Washington, where there was this place called Al's Magic Shop, and Al Cohen was this guy, and he ran this magic shop, and he was like a celebrity in Washington D.C. Politicians would go in there, everybody would go in there. Famous magicians would go in there. David Copperfield, everybody would go in there, and he would perform the trick, and then and then he wouldn't tell you how it was done. If you wanted to know how it was done, you had to buy the trick. There was always a gadget that was built into the trick, and I still have all these tricks from when I was, like 10 years old. I have them in a drawer somewhere.
That's pretty cool.
So that was a big magic, yeah, and ventriloquism.
Yeah, I dabbled in all that. But...
Yeah. So these things, it's like that documentary 28 Up, where they interview these British school children every 7 years, and you can see when they're 7 and then 14, you can see these little hints, so little things that they say that are little hints, or you can tell where they're going in their life based on what they said in the interview when they were 7.
Sure. It's interesting. It's interesting if somebody did something like that. Yeah.
The filmmaker died, but it started in the late 60s, early 70s, and it went to 14 up, 21 up, 28 up, 35 up, 42 up. I don't know what the last installment was, but
right. Yeah. So when you saw all this stuff, when you saw the exhibit and Frank and Ollie coming to Washington, that set you on that path now? That you wanted to do the animation?
I bought a Super 8 camera. I bought a Canon 10XL Super 8 camera with single frame capability, and then I bought a thing that was called an Ox Supermation stand that my father bought for me.
Wow!
And I saved up my, I was delivering papers and cutting lawns. I didn't have a lot of money, but I would save up and buy these things, the camera, and then eventually I bought a projector. I had the camera, and I had shot all these rolls of film. I couldn't see them,
right? But
I shot, and then eventually I saved up, and I got a projector so I could look at it. Oh my God, look at all this animation I did, and that was the beginning. I just got so hooked. I mean, I turned my whole bedroom into like a little animation studio, and I was nuts. I was just obsessed with animation in high school, and and then when it came time to apply to art schools, I knew that RISD was one of the few art schools that was offering animation classes, and I mean, it's SVA and Cal Arts and a couple of others, and
there weren't a whole lot. I think Pratt had some sort of program in Brooklyn.
Pratt, and but RISD was the top art school, and least that was what that was what I was told, and I think my parents didn't like the idea of me living in New York City. Which
Right.
is funny because that's where I've been here for 40 years. Yeah.
No, I was going to say New York City at that time was not the greatest. I mean, it's gotten better over the years, but that was a rough time,
Well,
the 70s. And
it's there's a lot of crime in the 70s and into the early 80s, but
yeah.
So anyway, so I got accepted to the Rhode Island School of Design. And that was thank God, because that was probably the only school for me, and got a lot out of it. I had wonderful professors there, and I really they at RISD they teach animation not as a trade, but
Mhm.
as a fine art. They teach animation for personal expression.
Right.
And it's a little bit like the experimental program CalArts that was started by Jules Engel, and it's so that was just, it came as a bit of a shock to me when I got there. I didn't even know that they were going to teach animation like that. I
Mhm.
didn't even know that the films. I didn't know much about independent animation. But I discovered that I responded to that approach, and I really I made some very good films while I was at RISD.
Mhm.
There was another book that I'm forgetting that was also that I remember too. I think it was in high school, or maybe it was in my first year at RISD. There was this book called The Animation Book. It was written by Kit Laybourne,
Mhm.
and
I know you're right about Kit Laybourne. The second author of that book, I don't recall, but
yeah. Well, anyway,
Mhm.
it was. I think there were two guys who wrote it, and that book was one of the few books. It came out. I think it was published in around 1980, and I still have my copy of it. But in that book, they highlight a lot of the independent animators
Mhm.
in Canada, in the United States, and some in Europe. And that's when I first read about George Griffin and people like that.
I'd seen a lot of independent animation as I was growing up, and so a lot of Hubley stuff. So
Yeah, the Hubley,
yeah,
John and Faith.
um, yeah, and a lot of those people ended up because there was no, the thing is with independent animation, unless you're doing commercials or you're doing something as part of another film, it's hard. It was hard back then to really make a living off independent film, or independent animation. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're right. And that you have to either have like in the case of the Hubleys, they were very successful doing commercials,
Mhm.
and the commercials financed their short films, and they had kind of their goal, their motto, was to make a film a year, personal film a year, and they would just somehow find a way to get it made,
Mhm.
or either have something going that's lucrative like that, or you're a full-time teacher, a professor teaching animation.
Yeah.
Then you get your sabbatical, you get your summer off, your winter break, your spring break, and that's. I've noticed that a lot of the independent animators today are often people who are teaching animation full time somewhere. So,
Right.
so that's it, because these films don't make any money really. The independent short films, they don't, but they can lead to work
Mhm.
for you. So it's good and I think that worked out for the Hubleys and many other independents, where it's the kind of work you want to do, and people will, somebody can see it and say, oh, that would be good for something we're doing, and so it's good to make these films,
Oh, absolutely.
and do it. And it's now with the digital revolution, making films has really come down. The cost of making films is really.
Oh, well, that's huge, right? Because it used to be, you had to rent out a camera stand, or, if you knew how to actually shoot under a camera and thread that stuff. But the film stock and all this, the artwork itself, and then shooting it under the camera, the time that it takes to do that, and then taking all this stuff, if you have to do any editing, adding a soundtrack to it, all this stuff, and just to come up with the negative,
Yeah, well, when I got to New York, it was still film was the way to go. That was the way to do animation, was to shoot it on film. And I did that for about almost 10 years. I was working for clients and renting Oxberries and shooting on 16 or 35, and shooting late at night to save money on the rental of the Oxberry, and going to Times Square at like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, dropping off the film, and then picking it up the next day and threading it up. And I mean, it was, oh my God. I mean, sometimes I tell my students about this when they complain about it. It's like, oh, come on. You guys have it so easy. Don't start with me. I mean, oh God. Yeah. I mean, and then you get a hair in the gate or some scratches on the film, and then you have to reshoot it. And it's, you can lose your shirt if you're not careful. I mean, I don't miss those days at all. I really don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you have, I'm sure you had an Oxbury over in RISD, right? To shoot stuff?
Yeah, they had a couple of them. Yeah, they had a couple of them. And we also had something called a 4-Ox animation stand, which was a competitor to the Oxbury. And that was not a very good camera. It was a stand that was kind of clunky, and you didn't want to shoot on the 4-Ox if you could help.
Right.
I think
when you were in school doing these films, because did you do a film a year over there for the 4 years, or?
Yeah, I made 2 films sophomore year that were 16 millimeter. One was called Wham Bam Thank You Clam. It was a stop motion claymation that was 2 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
And that one turned out pretty well. It was shown at the Film Forum for 2 weeks by Janet Maslin of the New York Times. Actually, it was my sophomore film. And then I made another film called New York City Rhapsody, which was hand-drawn 2D animation. It wasn't as good. It was about a trip I made to New York City, which in a way was kind of a precursor to the film I eventually made about New York. But
right.
And then I made a couple little films there. But then my thesis film was called The Viscera, which I started my late junior year and finished senior year, and that was the 10-minute stop motion cutout film, 2D cutout film. Mm-hmm. And that film won some awards and got me some attention. It was very disturbing, very dark, and it was a horrific film. My parents hated it. I think it had a lot to do with me not going to Cal Arts, because they were like, we're not going to encourage this anymore. You're going to make more films like that. You can just forget it.
Wow.
Wow. It was I kind of went a little too far with that film, but I'm very proud of it. And, it got me, once it got into some very big festivals, and I got a NYFA grant, a New York Foundation for the Arts grant based on that film.
Wow.
Very hard grants to get in New York City.
Mm-hmm. The way you're talking about this stuff, you were experimenting with a lot of different, in the medium of animation, but you were experimenting with all these different techniques. So stop motion and clay, and that's the way they taught. And as sophomore year, they had Yvonne Anderson taught a class. It was like a 2D class in the 2D animation techniques in the fall, and then in the spring it was stop motion, 3-dimensional techniques with stop motion. Right.
So that was the way it set up, and then junior year it was called Animation 2 or something, and it was just sort of it was more of an experimental animation 1-year program where the whole focus was to find it was taught by this woman named Amy Kravitz, and it was about how she taught animation from this very spiritual, metaphysical place, and all about trying to find your inner vision through a series of lessons that she she would give us each week, and we would. They didn't have enough light tables in those days, so we were animating on pads of tracing paper, and then shooting them on a Oxberry or on a Bolex.
Right.
And then we would we'd develop our own pencil test with we would shoot on Hicon film and unload the Bolexes or the magazine from the Oxberry in a dark room and then thread it onto something called a Kimmelman reel and drop it in the developer and develop our own film and then hang it out to dry on a clothesline.
Wow.
16. It was black and white Hicon film, and then we thread it up and look at our pencil tests.
It's very
That's
neat.
how we did it.
I think that's how they used to do it at the studios too. They would just shoot. I think like Snow White, when they did Snow White. Snow White was shot on high contrast. Yeah.
Yeah, it was it looked like it from when I look at those old pencil tests online of the Male Pilot and Mickey's Fire Brigade. It looks, you can see the little splotches and the chemicals on the pencil test,
Yeah.
That's how we did it. It was a good, they really showed you at RISD, how to make a film from beginning to end. And then we had to do our own A and B negative. We had to cut our own negative. We did our own, what's called A and B rolling at RISD.
Wow.
Where we glue the negative together using a hot sensor. And then that goes to the lab in New York City. It was like launching the space shuttle in those days. Film for the senior animation show. I mean, it was. I think I almost had a nervous breakdown senior year. I was a mess. I mean, I made this 10-minute stop motion film shot on ones on an Oxberry with camera moves.
Right.
We didn't have a computer. We didn't have a computer motion controlled. We didn't have a computer controlled Oxberry, so you had to calculate. You had to figure out how to do the camera moves with math. Calculate.
If I recall those cameras, they had like a meter on the side, almost like a car, like an odometer, and
certain number of numbers, you could slow out or of a start position or end position. You turn it so many numbers, a little more and a little less, a little less, a little less, a little less, and you'd have a camera.
Yeah, you'd have to be a mathematician to figure out all this stuff.
I know. I can't believe I it's just insane. It's so easy now to do these things.
I know.
My God. It is, but it's still computer. So if you're, some people are Luddites and they're afraid of computers. They don't know. They're afraid to learn software. The whole thing is a mystery to certain people at a certain age. Even young people. I teach now, and they have a hard time with the computer.
I think it's a fear of doing something incorrectly. I think it's a fear of failure, and you have that with anybody. It doesn't have to be computers; it could be anything. They just won't attempt something because they're afraid they're going to fail and screw it up.
Well, there's good reason to. I mean, it's hard to do. It's hard to make a good animated film. It's easily make a bad one everybody makes a. It's very easy to make a bad film, especially if you're working by yourself. There's nobody to tell you that your idea is bad. You just.
Well, if you look at what Hollywood's doing,
in Hollywood,
you got all these people that don't know what they're doing.
Look at Steven Spielberg made Howard the Duck, or was that George Lucas?
George Lucas.
And nobody. It was a terrible idea, but he made it right after the success of Star Wars, and everybody was like, oh, so that there's.
Everybody makes a clunker.
Look at Hollywood and say this is when all these bad movies get made, because they often get made right after a success,
right?
Where that director success, and then they're like, "Oh, we'll give you a blank check. You can do anything you want." And that's usually when these, films like Ishtar and movies get made. in 1941. That was the Spielberg movie that was terrible.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're talking about, but
Well, we're just talking about good things and bad things and the fear of failure. And
it's easy to get off on the wrong foot and go off, start making something that you're sort of you think is great, and then you realize you wake up one day and you go, "Oh my God, this is terrible. What was I thinking?"
Right.
That happens.
But then there's also the fear of not completing it. Like maybe it is okay, maybe, and so you carry on.
You got to finish it and just learn from your mistakes and just get it out there and say, okay,
Right.
I don't want to. I mean, you don't want to be one of those people spending your whole life working on one film.
Yeah, Richard Williams did that, didn't he?
Yes, and there are others. I won't mention any names, but.
So, okay, so you did the 4 years of RISD, you graduated. What was the next step for your career? Because now you had what are you going to do? Look for work, or are you going to try to work independently, or what happened?
What was the next step? What did you say?
The next step after RISD.
Oh, step. Yeah, I got to New York, and I landed a job. My first job in New York City before I moved to New York. I got, I had this father who was very, very, he grew up in Flatbush. He didn't like the idea of me moving there, and he was nervous about it. And he said, "You can't move there unless you get offered a full-time job in animation." So, in 1984, the country was in a recession. There weren't a lot of, the economy was just not going well. And there were not a lot of jobs. There was this one. So I got that movie directory. It was that yellow book thing, movie industry directory. And it had all the animation studios listed with their addresses and their phone numbers in there. And I got a hold of that book and I mailed out, 50, 100 snail mail resumes with cover letters. And one of the studios I contacted was this place called Charlex. And they were the one studio that was actually making a lot of money, and they were putting all the other studios out of business. And they were a high tech video post production house, 1-inch post production house that was also doing motion graphics, and they were doing a lot of animatics for Madison Avenue. And so they got my resume, and I don't know what they saw in it, but this guy read it, and he called me in Washington, D.C., and he said, "We're very impressed with your resume. If everything on here is true, we'd like to have you come up for an interview and show us your work." And so I did, and all my films were on 16 millimeter, and he had been a student at the Rochester Institute of Technology, and he had still had his Bell and Howell projector, so he brought it to work the day of my interview, and I threaded up my RISD films, and they loved my films. Everybody at the Charlex loved my work, and even the ad agency people who were paying $500, $1,000 an hour to edit a TV commercial stopped what they were doing and came into this big soundstage, and where my films were playing on a rotation on a Bell and Howell projector,
right,
16 millimeter. And so at the end of the afternoon, this guy Alex, who ran the studio, said, "We'd like to offer you a full-time job, as working at our studio, and you can start as soon as you can move up to New York." And so that's how I got to New York. And then I got on the phone. It was in the lobby of it was a big animation studio. It was right at 2 West 45th Street. I called my phone. I said, "Guess what, Dad? You found that full-time job in animation. Looks like I'm moving to New York." And he couldn't believe it. Really angry. It's all the man of my word. If I said that you did it, Willie, I got to give you credit. You found that full-time job in animation in New York. And it was like finding a needle in a haystack. I mean, it was just, I didn't have. So that guy, I was there for about a year. Then I worked I worked at the Ink Tank briefly and then I worked at a couple other Peter Wallach animation studio. It was Eli Wallach's son, Peter, had a studio in Manhattan. I worked there, and then then I ended up animating children's books for the home video market for about 6 years, where I produced animation shot on Oxberries, and did that 6 years, and that was it was good, but for 6 years, and the money was not very good, and
Right.
I got some experience, working, but the films were just, it was like camera moves on children's books, that kind of thing.
Right. With probably a little animation thrown
I
in.
did,
Like
yeah, I did. I would show little eye blinks, little head jiggles, but it was just awful, And I was about, at my wit's end. Couldn't animate another damn, Elves and the Shoemaker, or Hair and the Tortoise, or
Right.
No, I can't do this anymore. Please don't ask me to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, this woman I went to art school with, I called her up and said, I'm looking for a gig. And she said, oh, there's this studio in Times Square, and they're staffing up right now, and they're working on a new show called Beavis and Butthead.
Wow.
And it's 1993, and I thought, oh, what the hell is that? And she said, oh, just call them up. They're in Times Square, and here's the number. Here's the person to talk to. And I called them up, and they actually knew who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, you should come in, and if you can draw Beavis and Butthead, which I didn't think would be, well, I didn't even know what they look like. So I got there. I didn't know what they looked like, and I drew them.
Right.
I said, okay, we'll try you out for a couple of weeks as a storyboard revisionist. And then that wasn't too hard. And then I did that, and I got promoted to a layout artist, and then I eventually got promoted to a storyboard artist, and then I worked on the movie. And
Wow.
I got to, even on the side, I actually got to design some of the characters on the show, which was something I did kind of informally, and I was not ever credited as a character. That was always kind of fun. I liked when Mike Judge would say, hey, Willie, come into my office. I want you to design the phone sex lady. And, and I was like, okay, fine. And I enjoyed that.
Right. Wow. Happy days over at MTV Animation.
It was fun in the beginning, and I met a lot of people. Like, I was my first time ever working on a TV series, working in the industry, and I learned a lot from it. I worked with some great animators, I've made some really good friends who I'm still close with today, and then and it was nice because I didn't have my own business. I didn't have to scramble for work. I just go in. It was a 9-to-5 kind of job. And for like 5 years, I just would walk in and draw Beavis and Butthead.
That was my next question. How many years did you spend over there?
About 5 years. I think maybe a little shy of 5 years. And
Was it steady, or did you work for like a couple of months and then they kind of laid you off and then brought you back?
There'd always be a hiatus for 4 to 6 weeks, and then that was I always welcomed that, because I could then travel. I could go to Europe or go somewhere and, just kind of work on my own stuff. And I did. I started developing this character called Mr. Smoothie.
I remember that.
So one of the great things about working at Beavis and Butthead was we were producing the show in-house at MTV. We were not a studio, it was not a studio run by, an independent contractor. We were in-house at MTV. We were down the hall from the executives, the MTV development guys, the next Beavis and Butthead. So we all thought we were the next Mike Judge,
Right.
And that so we thought, okay, they encouraged us to develop shows. So I started writing these scripts and started developing this character called Mr. Smoothie about this ice cream cone who's melting and who wants to reproduce, and he's looking for a woman who's ovulating. I don't know how I came up with this. But anyway, so
now Mr. Smoothie looks similar to some other character.
Mr. Softy, the mobile ice cream truck.
Yes.
It was a parody, mobile ice cream truck.
a parody. Right.
I changed parody. Yes, yeah. But
It was great.
a lot.
It was great.
Anyway, so I didn't get anywhere with the scripts. I didn't get anywhere with the pitch Bibles, so I said, all right. Around that time, I started investing in computer equipment. I started around the mid '90s, like a lot of my coworkers on Beavis. I bought my first computer. I learned After Effects, and I started experimenting with After Effects, and I learned how to do sort of digital puppetry with After Effects. And I thought maybe this is the way to do Mr. Smoothie. I saw it always as a stop motion thing with puppets, but I figured out a way to do it in After Effects. So I made a 2-minute short, and when I finished it, after I left MTV, I was working at that point at Jumbo Pictures. And I finished this 2-minute little teaser, and people loved it. So this is great. And then I got the name of these producers at Comedy Central. And one day on my lunch break, I went up. I was working down in Soho at Jumbo, and I went up during my lunch break and dropped off a VHS tape of Mr. Smoothie to Comedy Central. They're right around where Clump Circle is, and they loved it. Within 2 hours of me dropping off the tape, they called me at my landline in Brooklyn. I didn't have a cell phone at that point. I called into my office, and they said, we just saw Mr. Smoothie, and we want to talk to you right away about Mr. Smoothie. We're doing a pilot and we want to use Mr. Smoothie in our pilot that we're creating. I couldn't believe it. I was just, I nearly died.
Well, you're a talented guy, and you have a lot of very unique ideas. So when you showed me this thing, Mr. Smoothie, you do the voice of Mr. Smoothie, which is kind of fun.
I'll do the voice now. I'm Mr. Smoothie. I serve ice cream out of my head, and I belong the interstate along Route 66, and so that's the voice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was weird and wonderful, and
scary and creepy. Oh, I still show it to my students, and they, when I start teaching, usually the first day I talk a little bit about what I'm doing, and then sometimes I'll show them my work. And Mr. 2 minutes long. Every time I show that to my college students, they go crazy. They say, "Oh my God, Professor, we would totally watch that. I don't know why wasn't that a show?" And I was like, "That's what I'd like to know. And that's what I'd like to know, why I'm out here in Montclair, New Jersey, teaching you guys where I should be in Hollywood." And am I bitter? No, I'm not bitter. But
the one good thing about living today is the fact that you have these resources. You have YouTube, and you have I think you post all your stuff on what, Vimeo? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You have these resources where you can actually post your work, and then it's just you have to be creative about letting people know about it. I think the just these outlets allow you to be seen now, whereas you didn't have that 30 years ago. You didn't have, you did a film, you had the film, and the only way to get that seen is to either raid some festival somewhere and have them show it, or you'd have to send it, your only copy of this thing, or if you had a couple of copies, you send it to people, or VHS, and hope that they actually watch it.
Yeah, back in those days, it was like the Spike and Mike Sick and Twisted, which is where the MTV executives first saw Mike Judge's Beavis and Butthead.
That was Frog Baseball, I think.
Frog Baseball. And they had, before Sick and Twisted, Spike and Mike, they had the Ron Eppl's tourney of animation. I think his name was Ron Epple, and then everybody else. But anyway, they had these different things that would tour college campuses,
Yeah.
would come around. that's how you got your film seen.
Right.
That has made it a lot easier. But on the other hand, there's kind of a glut of now anybody can do animation. Anybody who's got a little Procreate or a laptop with Adobe Animator, anybody can animate now. There's just so much stuff out there now. But
Right.
back in our day, when we were in our 20s, there was very few schools were teaching animation, and there weren't that many animated films getting made every year. So it's sort of in some ways it was if you did something good, it was easy to stand out because there wasn't a lot being done.
Right. And there weren't a lot of people going into it to learn it. I think Cal Arts had they had a class, maybe 20 people in it, for. It wasn't hard to get into the Cal Arts experimental program in the 80s because there weren't the undergrad schools that were teaching animation feeding into it. There weren't that many schools that could feed into Cal Arts. Right.
Now there's just, it's so hard to get into that MFA program at Cal Arts. It's just talented, and you have something to say, and you have something new to say, then the world will take notice and will pay attention. And that's true in any art form, whether it's music or painting or sculpture, or if you have something that hasn't been said, somebody will take notice of it. Usually, even if it could be. It's just you have to have something to say.
Right.
And that's all there is to it. If you do anything, if your work is derivative and it looks like everything else that's been done before, it's historically, it's just not important. Nobody cares. It's you're just saying what's already been said.
Mm-hmm.
So when I do something, I always try to, I try to make a contribution, and I try to say something that needs to be said, that isn't being said.
Right.
And using new technology, because every time something new comes along, new technology with computer animation makes it possible to now say things that haven't been said before,
mm-hmm.
in a bad way. So,
in a visually different way, hopefully.
Yeah, so take computer animation. When Pixar came out with Toy Story, it was great. They were just trying to create realism, idealized kind of realism. But you can take that same software and you can experiment with it and do other things with it, and not and say something original and new. And
mm-hmm.
eventually these softwares will get in the hands of artists, and they'll make new statements with it that haven't been said, and that's what happens.
Right.
Actually.
Interesting.
Yeah.
When you finished up with Beavis and Butthead, did you have a little bit of a lag time before you went over to Jumbo?
No, I didn't. I went right from Beavis to Jumbo. It was literally like I think maybe I had a few days off, but it was. I was supposed to work. I'd worked on Daria for a season, and then
mm-hmm.
as a work artist, and then I was supposed to work on a show called Downtown.
I heard about that.
That was like Chris Pronowski's show that eventually ran for one season, but it was delayed.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to. I needed something to do. So I got an offer to work at. I got hired at Jumbo to work, which was owned by Disney at the time, and,
right?
And they were doing the Disney Dogs, and I worked on the Dogs' first movie. It was an animated feature.
Right.
And I worked storyboard artist kind of version.
Right.
That was a really nice little studio. I enjoyed the people there.
Where was Jumbo? That was downtown too, right? That was down Soho?
It's down in Soho off Spring Street, off 6th Avenue, Spring Street. I think it was Barrick Street, Barrick and Spring over there.
Right.
And there were quite a few former MTV people working there, so I knew a lot of the people there. So that was okay. That was fun.
Yeah. What was the turnaround like like you were doing storyboard on that, right?
I was revising storyboards on that.
Oh, okay.
Doug's first movie. Yeah,
Right.
There were too many. I think we had too many artists working in that studio. There was a lot of downtime, so we were just. I remember I had so much free time. I was creating these like post-it galleries in my little workstation, and I had like started developing my own stuff.
Right.
That was also right after I finished Mr. Smoothie, and I had a 6-month option with Comedy Central, so everybody I was on pins and needles, wondering if I was going to be the next Matt Stone and Trey Parker for Comedy Central, and everyone thought for sure this was going to be a series, because everybody loved Mr. Smoothie, and
Sure.
so I was kind of sitting there working at this show, thinking, it's only a matter of time before I get to leave this place.
Work on Mr. Smoothie.
I thought it was going to happen. Everyone thought it was going to happen.
Yeah.
We all had to we had to keep quiet about it too, because I had signed that Disney contract that said everything I drew was owned by Disney, but there was something called an exclusionary list that you could add to your contract. It said everything but these things, so I think I wrote that on there.
Right.
I still trust the contract, and I was like, everybody kept their lips sealed, about Willy's Mr. Smoothie thing. So it was sort of this secret at the studio.
Isn't that crazy though? That they're basically saying they own your mind while you're working for them, day and night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of silly, but
Yeah.
so nothing happened. I never got in any trouble, or when I had the contract with Comedy Central, it wasn't any. I was still working,
Right.
but it was an option. It was a 6-month option, which meant Comedy Central had 6 months to decide whether they wanted to produce it as a show or
Right.
include this other show they're doing. Yeah.
So what happened after how long were you Jumbo working on that? On Doug?
I worked there for, I think it was at least a couple of years, on a couple of shows, and then that came to an end. And Disney stopped they did not renew their contract with Jumbo, but they own the name Jumbo, so the studio had to come up with a new name for their studio. So they came up with the name Cartoon Pizza.
Mm-hmm.
I was working there when that happened, and then I don't know. They eventually, the studio got smaller and smaller, and I eventually left and worked various other places.
Right.
It was around. I guess it was in 2005. I worked with you in Jersey on a movie. Yeah.
Yeah, with Christopher Reeve.
It was Superman, who was who, as we know, was in a wheelchair, and that was an interesting experience. And that was I don't know if you want to. What do you remember about that experience?
I remember a lot of stuff about it. I remember coming into the place and going, "My God, it's." So to tell the story here, basically, Willy and I worked on a movie about a boy and his baseball, and it was a talking baseball, and so I didn't know anything about it coming in, and I think the first day I was there was about 6 people there that were hired on as storyboard artists, and I think you were one of them, but we had a bunch of other people in there. We had Next Disney guy, and I think we had Ray De Silva. Is that right?
Silva?
Ray De Silva. Do you remember? Is that what his name was, or he was an older gentleman?
That's right. We did have him briefly. I forgot about that.
Yeah, he had authored the Kodak book on animation back in the 70s. There was.
Right, he was on our team. I completely forgot that. But yeah, we had Rich Coder, we had Seth Feinberg, Ilya was our storyboard supervisor.
Yes,
we had this guy from the Orlando Disney Studio.
Yeah,
he was very good, and a couple others, and that was a very strange experience, and it was all in Newark, New Jersey.
Newark, New Jersey. I had to take two trains to get there. I think you had to take two trains to get there.
Take the subway to the Path or to Jersey Transit.
Right.
It's not hard to commute, but it was. Anyway, the movie eventually came out. It wasn't very good, and
yeah, all I remember about that experience was coming in that first day, sitting side by side, and I felt like, my God, now I know what a sweatshop is, you know. And I mean, it's nowhere like a sweatshop, but we were sitting next to each other, getting pieces of a script that was not very good, and drawing on these little sheets of paper. And I was like,
yeah, they had those pads, and then we had to put the numbers on all the panels.
It was kind of crazy because I felt like, oh, they're deconstructing the animation medium, you know, for features. Do it their own way. And it was just, like you said, it was a very weird experience.
It was very strange, and tragically died during the production of the film.
Chris Reeve died.
It went from bad to worse, and then I remember one day we were sitting there, and I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, no, go ahead. No, this is important, I think.
You're such a fan of animation. We were sitting there, and one day, this parade of storyboard artists from Disney walked in. And you were like, you looked at me, and you're like, uh-oh, this doesn't look good for us. And it was like Randy Johnson or Randy.
A bunch of Disney artists walk in, and
and put up in a hotel, and they were going to basically replace us.
Yeah, they're going to take over the studio and move it to California.
And basically, we were. I won't mention. There was a producer who they brought in.
Well, he passed away. He passed away now, so you can say who that is. I think Ron Tip.
Oh, I forgot about that. No, there's a woman named Janet Healy.
Yeah,
Who had Shark Tales, and she was the one who kind of got in there and said, "Okay, we got to get some script doctors. We got to bring in some Disney storyboard guys. We got to get this right. The ship is, we got to turn this ship around because it's going nowhere, And she started they had billions and billions in cash, no debt, this company, and they were able to buy whoever they wanted, and
sure
they did. It wasn't enough to really make a good movie. The movie was ill-fated, I think, from the very beginning. But at least, it was a company that was trying to compete with Disney and Pixar and DreamWorks, and thought they didn't realize how hard it is to do that.
No, it was, it wasn't the crew that we had. It was the people constructing the script. I just felt that that's where the weak point was right there. Because we had some talented people there. We had some very funny people, They just threw everybody away and just said, "Nah, we're just going to take it to California and just do this thing." And that's what they did. And
But then they put us in development. So they kept us around for a while, and we were developing. I thought they treated us pretty well, all things considered.
They did. They did.
Months notice. They told us they did everything by the book, and maybe the salary could have been better, but it was a very strange chapter in my life. I'll never forget it, and it's bizarre. But it was, when it ended, it was like, fine, whatever. I don't know.
I remember. I think I remember the last day when we left, and I took the train back, and I think I grabbed a beer with you at Penn Station.
The Iron District or something. We had this big dinner, this big lunch.
Yeah,
still there, and that was. I remember that, and I guess I do remember having a beer with you somewhere. And then, But one of the nice things was that they remember that big was in Times Square, that spinal cord research fundraiser for Chris Reeve's organization. I forgot what it was called, but we all had to rent a tux, and we went to this black tie event. Did you go to that, or maybe you didn't go to that?
I don't know if I went to that. I don't remember going to that.
You were the one who didn't go. but we all rented a tux, and it's like all these movie stars were there. We had it was like the Golden Globes. We had a whole table. Like we were right up in the front of the stage, and the movie. And Paul Simon sang, and all sorts of everybody was there. Chris Reeve's widow was there. This was right after he had died.
Right.
That was I'll never forget that. That was something.
Yeah, I'm trying to think where I was for that. I know when Chris Reeve died, I was home. I took the week off.
Probably a month or so after he died, and it was
yeah.
I don't know why you didn't go, but for some reason you decided not to go, because you would have. Yes, you weren't there for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah,
you would remember this, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, it was a big.
I would know. No, I remember other things we did. There's one story I have to tell.
Yes.
When we were developing, I guess they wanted to immerse us into Yankee Stadium, because this movie, The Boy and His Baseball, they wanted to give us the flavor of Yankee Stadium. Do you remember this?
Well, there was a little league. It was a minor league baseball diamond near the office building, and they took us to the. Are you talking about that? No, they wanted to take us over to Yankee Stadium for a game to get the flavor of Yankee Stadium. We did go to a game, didn't we?
We did.
I remember that vaguely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I remember this because it was crazy. They had one of their drivers from the place, the studio.
Right. We sideswiped somebody, and the guy he didn't care. He's like, we got to get to the game. He practically ran over people because we were running late or something. I thought
it was in a Deathmobile, because the way this guy was driving, he was driving crazy. We all crowded into a van to go to Yankee Stadium to see this game. And it was mandatory. You had to see this game because they had seen some documentary of Disney, and Disney with Lion King. They had to go to like Africa to kind of experience that, right? And then, and for every movie, they kind of do that. They send a team to like China to do something, to get the flavor of the place so that they could do the backgrounds and stuff, be influenced by it, right? So they got it in their head that we're going to go to Yankee Stadium because we're going to get the flavor of the original Yankee Stadium. But we weren't in the original Yankee Stadium. We're in the updated version of Yankee Stadium. But anyway, we crowded into this van. And I don't know, they had this crazy guy driving, and he took off like a rocket, and he was zooming down the highway in Jersey up to the George Washington Bridge and went right through the toll. And just, do you remember this? Do you remember this was a crazy drive.
I do remember this. I completely blocked this out. But I do remember. I think he sideswiped somebody, and he should have stopped and got out of the car, and he didn't do that, and he just was. I felt like I was in like the Love Bug movie or something, or some Disney movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Or that movie with What's Up, Doc, with Barbara Streisand and
Ryan O'Neal. Yeah,
that would have been a more interesting animated film. Was us that wild van ride to Yankee Stadium would have been funny.
Yeah, be very funny. Anyway, I just
So-
remember arriving at Yankee Stadium and just hearing all the sirens of police cars and stuff. It was like, we better get out of here or else we're going to be witnesses. And we just got inside.
Yeah, okay. I remember that. That was the whole thing was bizarre. The whole strange. That whole
Strange experience.
crew was ended up in the trash, and because the script was not very good, and I remember one of the storyboard artists said, everything we're doing is going to end up in the trash.
Yeah.
And I worked on that thing for how many months were we there? Was it 6 months or something like that?
I think we were there for a full year.
It wasn't a full year. I think it was like
9 months.
9 months. I don't think it was a full year.
Okay.
But it was quite a long time, and everything we did never ever saw the light. Never got on the screen. Nothing.
Yeah. There's one thing I remember doing, which I may cut this out. They gave me a section of this movie with I guess it was, you had gangsters in the movie, and you had one guy that was kind of like, it was kind of like, the short thug, and then you had the big dumb guy, the dumb thug, and then he would do something stupid and basically get whacked over the head every time he said something stupid. It's something out of like Warner Brothers, and so it was scripted that way, and so I was going to have fun with it. It's slapsticky, and somewhere along the way, I realized, because Christopher Reeve was going to look at this, and he was going to review it, and I was like, this is not going to fly. He's going to cut all this stuff out. And my reasoning was that he had, he was paralyzed because he had a bad polo accident. And I just thought, well, he's going to be sensitive to this. He's probably going to pull this stuff out, but I'm just going to do it anyway. So I did it. And sure enough, when they came back, they said, yeah, he's taking all this. This is out. This is out. This is out. All the physical stuff was out. And I was like, that's kind of for me, that was kind of the fun of the cartoon, or the show was doing some of the slapstick stuff, and he hated it.
They paid us, and it was a gig, and
yeah,
whatever. I
we still got credit on it.
Yeah, I know.
We're credited as a storyboard artist on the
story to tell. That's what it is. You can tell people.
Yeah. What'd you do after that? Basically, I did some stuff for Saturday Night Live, and then kind of left the business for a little while. And
I started. I did some work for Yo Gabba Gabba, which was a Nick Jr. show, and then I worked on various freelance jobs, and then in 2009 I started teaching at a couple of art schools, and I discovered I love teaching, and I'm really good at teaching animation. So I've been teaching now for 15 years. In 2016, I released an animated short called New York City Sketchbook, which is probably the best thing I've ever done. It seems to be. I still get asked to screen it. It still gets. It screens in Europe from time to time at various festivals over there. I get asked to do. I get booked for speaking engagements where I talk about the film and the process and how I made it. So that was something I did that kind of changed my life in a really good way. It's leading to a lot of opportunities for me. And,
what I find interesting about all the stuff you do, it just has. It doesn't feel like anybody else's film. It feels like something you've done. They all feel very personal, which is great. New York City Sketchbook is amazing in a lot of different ways. It really captures the flavor of New York. And that's just, that's my point of view. But just looking at, it looks like it's something that you did sketch out in a sketchbook and then you brought to life, but really captures that New York City flair.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what happened was I needed to make another independent short film. I didn't know what to make a film about. And one day I had this sort of epiphany or that aha moment, and it was a memorial. I went to this party in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It was Memorial Day in probably 2013 or something like that. And I went and I drew all the people. One of the things I started doing around 2010 was I obsessively started keeping a visual diary, a sketchbook. I started drawing people in New York City in public places. And one of the reasons why I did this is going back to working on that movie in Newark one of the top storyboard guys that we worked with was this guy named Rich Coder, and he all on the subway going to work every day. Because I said to him, "How did you get so good at drawing and you're so good at storyboarding?" He said, "Well, he opened up his sketchbook and he showed me, and he had these beautiful drawings he did of people on the subway going to work." And I always remember that. I said, "Okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to take Rich's advice. I'm going to draw every day and keep a little pocket sketchbook." And so the New York City film, to get back to that, evolved out of this obsessive need to sketch and draw people from life. And what happened was, after doing this for several years, I accumulated hundreds of sketches of New Yorkers in public places all over New York City, hundreds, thousands of drawings of people in parks and cafes and subways everywhere. And I realized, I had this little inner dialogue with myself. I said, "Willie, you're an animator." "I'm an animator. You've got all these drawings of New Yorkers that you've got hundreds of these drawings." "Yes." This is, "Well, Willie, why don't you make an animated film using all your sketches and do a sort of an animated sketchbook of New York City?" And I said to myself, "Yes, that's a great idea, Willie. Why don't you do that?" So that's how it all came about. And I was at that Memorial Day barbecue, and I drew all these people at this outdoor barbecue in the East Village of Manhattan. Scanned the drawings, cut them out in Photoshop, brought them into After Effects, and did these little camera moves. And I thought, "Oh my God, this looks great. I can't believe how good this looks." And then I realized, oh my God, I have a bigger film staring me in the face. Why stop here? I'm just scratching the surface. I can make a whole animated film about New York City. And that's so I did. And then I did a Kickstarter, and I raised the money to make the film. And I had a friend who I went to art school with who was really good with this software called Cinema 4D, which is a 3D software. And he basically gave me the software and gave me some pointers on how to use it. And I was able to create this 3D matrix of New York City and stick my drawings and animated sequences into this 3D software and make it look kind of seamless. Once I figured out how to do that, I was off to the races, and I knew that it had the potential of being a very good film. And it did turn out extremely well, and it's led to all sorts of opportunities for me. So
it's won a bunch of awards, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. It's been shown all over the world, and it is. It's not about the awards, It's about It's great when you win awards, but the best thing is when you just want your film to be seen. So when you get into a festival, it's an honor just to have your film screened in the festival. So one of the greatest, the best experience I had was it got into quite a few festivals in Europe, but one of the ones was in Oxford, England, where Oxford University is. And I submitted the film there because I wanted to go to Oxford. I wanted to go to England, and it'd be fun to get the film into a festival in England and then travel with the film. And so it got into this festival in Oxford. It was this Oxford International Animation, or it wasn't an animation festival. It was a film festival. So they had animation was just one of the categories. And I won Best Animated Short, and I also won Best Film of the whole festival. It beat out all the feature films and all the documentaries and all the short live action films. It beat all of them. It gave me the grand prize of the festival.
That's incredible. It's incredible.
I said to them, "Are you think you want to give this to a Yankee? We kicked ass. You really want me to take this home? And they're like, "Oh, we want you to have it." I said, "Oh,
that was very neat.
That was, yeah. There were these judges who just loved my film. They just thought it was important. And it's not the Cannes Festival. It was a small festival in England.
Right.
The competition wasn't as stiff as what you would see at some of these, like the Berlin Ollie or the Cannes Festival, the Toronto, So, but nonetheless, that was I really needed that. It made me really. That was a lot of.
That's still, if people haven't seen it, where can they see this now? Do they have to go to film festivals, or can they see this at home?
Well, you can watch the trailer on my website, willyhartland.com, WILLYHARTLAND.com, and you can watch the trailer. And if you want to see it, I'll send you a link to the 13. It's a 13-minute short film, and I'll send you a link to it if you really want to see it. But it is not really on the internet right now.
Right.
Anyway.
What's next for Willy Hartland?
Well, I'm working on a new film. It's a surrealist story I wrote called The Artichoke, and it's quite a departure from the New York City film. It's stop motion 2D cutouts shot on Dragon Frame, which is stop motion software.
Okay.
And I'm working on this for longer than I'd care to say. I'm having a little. It's taking me longer than I anticipated, but I'm very happy with the new direction it's going in. And it was originally going to be hand drawn, and it just wasn't gelling, wasn't coming together that way. So I'm working on that, and I'm working on working with a producer now on a documentary feature. And I don't really want to talk too much about it publicly, but this is going great, and I got this project because of the success of the New York City film.
New York City Sketchbook.
City Sketchbook, and he loved it, and he said, "You're the guy for this." So that is what I'm working on right now.
Very cool. Very cool.
Should be. If it all goes according to plan, it'll become a feature, and it'll be a lot of work for me, and so very excited about it.
Okay. Very good. Hey, Willy, thank you for coming on here.
Oh, it was I loved it. Thank you so much. It was great to reconnect. And
yeah.
Your show is, I have to say, it's terrific. In fact, I would say it's cartoonerific.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at cartoonerific.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
Hey, thank you, Willy. Thank you for spending some time with us and talking about your career. Please check out Willy's film. You can go to willyhartland.com, take a look at his credits there, and he has some clips from New York City Sketchbook. Please check that out. You know, there's some wonderful independent animators out there, and some just work strictly in the commercial field. They're doing commercial projects or they're doing industrials, and then they do a personal film and they put it out there on film festivals, or it could be shown online or whatever. And you should check those out. There's some very interesting things. One of my particular favorites is it's cartoony, but it has its own style. It's something called Chief Your Butt's on Fire. And it's by Steve Moore, who's worked for Disney and for many other studios. So it's a wonderful short film. If you can find it online, I guarantee you'll like it. I'll try to put it on our Cartoonerific Facebook page. So there you go. Anyway, if you really like what you're listening to, please subscribe and please tell a friend. So anyway, we'll be back next week with more Cartoonerific interviews. So I want you to have a great day. I want you to have an excellent week. And thank you all once again for tuning in.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.